The car is quiet. Not because it's expensive, because it's ordinary. A gray sedan. 4 doors. Nothing chrome. Nothing loud. The kind of car nobody remembers 5 minutes after it passes. It slows at a gate that doesn't ask to be noticed. No cameras in view. No gold lettering. No brand stamped into the ironwork. Just iron, old ivy, and a stone wall that has weathered 3 centuries of weather and said nothing about any of it. The gate opens on its own. It always does. No guard. No buzzer. Just a quiet mechanism doing a quiet job. You've lived here for 6 months, and your own mother still thinks you're renting a studio downtown. That's the secret. Nobody flexes at an estate like this. They disappear into it. No logos. No wraparound glass. No skyline view for the drone shot. Just weight. Just permanence. Just a driveway that swallows the sound of the engine the second you pass through the gate. This is quiet luxury. And quiet luxury has a rule. If people can tell, you're doing it wrong. There's no security detail visible. No intercom demanding a name. Just a single camera, small and unlit, tucked into the stonework where a tourist would never think to look. The kind of security that isn't trying to be seen either. You park where you always park. Off to the side, near the old carriage house, not in front of the main entrance. Habits like that don't come from humility. They come from 30 years of watching people who inherited money the wrong way, the loud way, and watching what eventually happened to all of it. 6 months in, and the strangest part still isn't the house. It's how quickly silence starts to feel normal. Before we go further, subscribe. The finance lesson at the end changes how you'll see this house. Beyond the gate, gravel. Not asphalt, gravel, raked by hand that morning. The kind of driveway that makes you slow down without meaning to. Poplar trees line both sides, planted in perfect symmetry for a family that stopped existing 2 generations ago. Their names are on a plaque somewhere in the study. Nobody visits it anymore. The house itself is low, wide, stone. Older than any name it could be sold under. No skyline, no glass towers. No infinity pool announcing itself to the neighbors. Just mass. Just history holding still. This house wasn't bought to be seen. It was bought, or inherited, or quietly assembled over decades of decisions nobody photographed, to be lived in and never explained. Inside, the air smells like old wood, dust, and something faintly like a library. Linen curtains move slightly in a breeze that costs nothing, and yet feels like the most expensive thing in the room. There is no doorman, no concierge, just silence, and the sound of your own footsteps on stone that's been walked on for longer than your family has had a surname. Down the main hallway, portraits of people you're not related to still hang exactly where the previous owners left them. Nobody's bothered to take them down. Nobody's bothered to explain them either. That's the unspoken agreement with a house like this. You don't erase its history just because you now hold the paperwork. The furniture doesn't match in the way a showroom would insist on. A chair from one century sits beside a lamp from another. Nothing was staged. Everything simply survived, 1 generation at a time, because nobody needed to replace it to prove anything to anyone. This is the part that new money always misunderstands. Old money doesn't renovate for attention. It repairs quietly, and only when something actually breaks. You wake up to nothing. That's the tell. Real wealth doesn't hum. It doesn't chirp with delivery notifications every 4 minutes. It has silence. Thick, deliberate silence, built from 3-foot stone walls and 40 acres of buffer between you and the nearest other human being. Downstairs, the kitchen smells like coffee and old wood. A stone counter, cold to the touch, older than your grandparents. A single window over the sink frame's nothing but green. No other rooftops, no other lives visible from here. You check your phone once. Only once. Not out of discipline. Out of boredom. There's nothing urgent left to check. Nothing chasing you before 9 in the morning. Then the notification arrives. Not a text. Not a like. A number. A dividend payment. 6 figures. Quiet is the house it lands in. Here's the cold part. That deposit isn't a reward. It's rent. Rent the market pays you for owning a piece of it. No boss approved it. No client signed off. It arrived because years or decades ago, someone decided not to spend. You don't celebrate. You don't post it. You put the phone face down and finish your coffee. This is the part nobody shows on social media. The money that changes your life the least emotionally is often the money that changes your net worth the most. Outside, the gardener's truck rolls up the far side of the property, barely audible. Life continues, unhurried, unwitnessed. You take your coffee to the back terrace. Stone underfoot, cold even through socks. The lawn stretches out further than a phone camera could ever fit into one frame, which is exactly why you never bother trying to film it. There's no rush to be anywhere. No commute waiting. No calendar screaming for attention before 9 a.m. The only appointment today is with a groundskeeper who's been coming on Tuesdays since before you were born into this life, back when it still belonged to someone else's name. This is the version of luxury nobody markets correctly. It isn't excitement. It's the absence of urgency. Here's what the fantasy leaves out. An hour later, an envelope arrives. Property tax. 5 figures, due quarterly, entirely non-negotiable. The estate doesn't care that you love it. It sends a bill regardless of how beautiful the morning was. Then a second envelope. A repair estimate for the west wing roof. Copper flashing. Hand-cut slate. Not the kind of contractor who advertises. The kind who's booked 8 months out. Because there are only a handful of people left who know how to work on a roof this old. This is the part influencers never show you. An estate this size isn't a trophy. It's a liability with excellent manners. It costs money simply to sit there and be beautiful. Maintenance, insurance, staff, taxes. A quiet, recurring tax on quiet wealth. You pay it without flinching. Not because the number is small. Because you built the income before you built the house, so the number stopped being frightening a long time ago. That's the actual difference between owning an asset and being owned by one. Cash flow first, trophy second. Never the other way around. There's a third envelope too, thinner, easy to miss. An invoice from the arborist for the poplars lining the driveway. Trees that exist purely for symmetry and still need feeding, trimming, and inspecting every single season, regardless of whether anyone ever notices them. Nothing about this house pays for itself just by existing. Every square foot of quiet has a corresponding line item somewhere in a spreadsheet you check far more often than you check your reflection. Later, a call, a coworker. The same one you used to split a 2-bedroom with 3 years ago, venting about their landlord. Rent went up $200 this month. Their car needs a new transmission. $1,400 they don't have and can't easily find. You listen. You don't offer advice. You don't offer money. You offer a small nod. They can't even see through the phone. This is the tension nobody scripts, honestly. You're not hiding the estate to be cruel. You're hiding it because the moment people know, the relationship changes shape. Every request becomes a test. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every future favor gets measured against a number they now assume you have. So you say the safest true thing available to you. That's rough. I'm sorry. And you mean it. You remember exactly what $1,400 used to feel like. The way it used to feel like a mountain instead of a rounding error on a portfolio statement. You don't mention the estate, not out of shame. Because explaining it would take longer than the silence. And the silence protects both of you from a conversation neither of you actually wants to have. That's the private cost of quiet wealth, not guilt, distance. A small, permanent gap between the life you live and the life people assume you live. After the call ends, you sit with it for a second longer than you expect to. You think about offering to help. Quietly, anonymously, no strings. And then you think about what happens the next time their car breaks down, and the time after that, and how quickly a single kind gesture can quietly turn into an expectation. So you don't. Not this time. Instead, you make a note to check in again next week, the same way you always would have, back when $1,400 felt like a mountain to you too. The friendship survives. The secret survives with it. Here's the part that isn't romantic at all. This house isn't yours in the way people imagine ownership works. It sits inside a trust, a legal structure built specifically so that no single event, a lawsuit, a bad year, a divorce, can take it from the family holding it. The deed doesn't have your name in bold letters on a plaque by the gate. It has a trust name. Cold, administrative, deliberately boring. Boring is the point. Boring doesn't get seized easily. Boring doesn't get subpoenaed on a whim. Boring survives lawyers, recessions, and bad decisions made by people 3 generations from now who haven't been born yet. The wealthy rarely optimize for looking rich. They optimize for the asset outliving them, outliving their heirs, and outliving whatever crisis eventually tries to take it. There's an attorney who reviews this structure once a year, someone you've met exactly twice. His entire job is to make the house as boring as legally possible. No exposure, no loose ends, nothing a lawsuit could reach if a stranger ever tripped on the front steps and decided to sue. It's not paranoia, it's maintenance. The same way the roof gets inspected every spring, the paperwork gets inspected too. Nobody photographs that part. It's still the part that matters most. Late afternoon, the groundskeeper stops by. Same as every Tuesday for the last 30 years, technically employed by the trust, not by you personally. He doesn't call you sir. He calls you by your first name, the way people do when a relationship has quietly outlasted the paperwork attached to it. You walk the property line together. 40 acres of unremarkable, ordinary, extraordinarily expensive green space. No topiaries shaped like animals. No fountains built for photographs. Just grass, trees, and a stone wall that keeps the world exactly as far away as you need it to be. He mentions the well pump is aging. Another 5-figure repair. Sometime this year. No urgency. Just noted for the file. You nod. You've stopped reacting to numbers like that. Not because you're numb to them, but because you planned for them years before you ever needed to. This is what old money actually protects. Not the excitement of a number arriving, the complete absence of panic around it. Numbers like that used to keep you up at night once. Now they're just another line on a list, handled in order, without ceremony. Near the tree line, he points out a section of fence that's leaned slightly for as long as he can remember. Nobody's ever fixed it. Nobody's ever needed to. It still does its job. That's the entire philosophy of this property, summarized in one crooked fence post. Fix what fails. Ignore what merely looks imperfect. You thank him the same way you always do, and he heads back toward the equipment shed, whistling something you don't recognize. Another Tuesday, indistinguishable from the last 300. That evening, a call from an uncle. The relative who quietly explained all of this to you years ago, before any of it made sense. He doesn't ask how the house looks. He asks how the reserve account is holding up. 6 months of expenses, sitting untouched, in case the roof and the well pump ever decide to fail in the same season. He reminds you of the rule he gave you the first time you sat in this study as a kid, pretending to read books you didn't understand. The house is not the win. The house is what the win eventually gets to look like, if you don't rush it. You hang up and sit with that for a moment. The study smells like leather and old paper. A ledger sits closed on the desk, decades of entries in handwriting that isn't yours, tracking decisions that were made long before you existed. You add nothing to it tonight. You just close it, the way you were taught to, carefully, and without needing anyone to see you do it. Your uncle asks one more thing before hanging up, the same question he's asked every year since he first handed you the keys to any of this. Not how does it feel, but what did you not buy this year? He's more interested in the purchases you resisted than the ones you made. That, he says, is the only number that actually predicts whether any of this lasts another generation. You don't have a perfect answer yet, but you're starting to understand why he keeps asking. One more cold detail, because the story isn't complete without it. Insurance on a property like this isn't a formality. It's a specialty. Standard homeowner policies don't cover a structure this old, this large, or this exposed. It requires a private carrier, an annual inspection, and a premium that would cover an entire year's rent for most people in your old life. If a storm takes down a 200-year-old oak onto the east wing, there's no landlord to call. There's no warranty. There's a claims adjuster, a specialist contractor, and a bill that arrives regardless of how the insurance settles. This is the unglamorous truth behind every quiet luxury photo you've ever scrolled past. Somewhere behind the linen and the stone, someone is managing risk the way a business manages risk. Because that's exactly what this is. Not a house. A balance sheet with really good lighting. Every asset in this story has a twin nobody photographs. A policy number, a premium, a deductible, a folder in a filing cabinet that's far less romantic than the estate itself. The house doesn't get to just exist. It gets managed, quietly, the same way a company manages exposure. Because at this scale, a house and a company aren't as different as they look, Dot. Let's stop and talk about what's actually happening in this story. Because it isn't a fantasy. It's a framework, Dot. There are 2 kinds of wealth. Most people only ever build one of them, Dot. The first is consumptive wealth. Cars, watches, sneakers, the newest phone before the last one is even paid off. Consumptive wealth is bought to be seen. It depreciates the moment it leaves the store, and it needs an audience to feel worth having. It's expensive to maintain and nearly impossible to pass down. Give it 10 years, and most of it is landfill or a lowball resale listing nobody wants. The second is generational assets. Real estate, equities, businesses, land, trusts. Generational assets are bought to be held, not displayed. They compound quietly, whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not anyone even knows they exist. And unlike consumptive wealth, they're built specifically to outlive the person who bought them. The estate in this story isn't really about a house. It's a metaphor for a portfolio. Think about it. A well-built investment portfolio is large. It's permanent in the sense that it's built to survive market cycles instead of chasing them. And critically, it doesn't need to scream to be valuable. Nobody sees your brokerage statement. Nobody sees your dividend reinvestment plan quietly buying more shares every single quarter. It just works, in silence, in the background, whether you check the app or not. This brings us to the concept that actually separates people who look rich from people who are rich. Asset rich, cash lean. On paper, the person in this story is worth an extraordinary amount. Land, structures, holdings, decades of compounding. But they're liquid cash. The money actually sitting in checking, ready to spend on a whim, might be surprisingly modest. Most of the value is intentionally parked in things that grow, not things that spend easily. That's not a flaw in the plan. That's the entire plan. This is why old money rarely looks like new money. New money spends to prove the win happened. Old money reinvests to make sure the win keeps happening for another 50 years. The strategy was never about deprivation. It's about sequencing. Spend last. Compound first. And here's the part that should actually change how you think about your own money, regardless of your bank balance today. Every dollar you don't spend on something designed to be seen is a dollar that's free to become something designed to last. You don't need 40 acres to practice this. You don't need a trust or a groundskeeper or a study full of leather ledgers. You need the decision to buy the asset instead of the appearance of the asset. That decision, repeated quietly for 20 or 30 years, is the entire difference between a life that looks impressive to strangers and a life that is genuinely impressive to the only people who'll ever see the real numbers. Picture two people earning the exact same income for 20 years. One buys a new car every 3 years, upgrades every device the day it launches, and rents the biggest apartment the budget allows. The other drives something unremarkable, buys index funds on autopilot, and lives slightly below their means without ever announcing it. At the end of those 20 years, the first person has a garage full of depreciated memories. The second person has something that quietly generates income, whether they work or not. Nobody could tell the difference between them at any single dinner party along the way. That's the entire point. The gap wasn't visible until it was enormous. This is why the estate matters as a symbol. Not because you need one, because the discipline behind it. Reinvest before you reward yourself. Let the boring asset outperform the exciting purchase. Measure success in what compounds rather than what gets noticed. Scales down perfectly to any income level. The gate, the gravel, the trust. Strip all of that away, and what's left is just patience, applied consistently, for longer than most people are willing to wait. By evening, the house goes quiet again. Same silence as the morning. Stone doesn't change moods. It just holds them. Patiently, the way it's held every mood that's ever passed through this room for the last 200 years. You sit outside. No infinity pool, no skyline, just grass, a stone wall, and the kind of privacy that money can buy, but attention never could. Here's what nobody tells you about wealth like this until you're standing inside it. The freedom was never the acreage. It was never the stone or the gate or the gravel raked by hand every morning before you even wake up. The ultimate flex isn't the house. It's the fact that you don't need anyone to know you own it. No audience required, no approval needed, no caption necessary. Just a gate that opens quietly, a ledger that balances without applause, and a life that no longer needs anyone else's reaction to feel complete. That's the whole lesson, hidden inside a POV about a gate that doesn't ask to be noticed. So here's the question, and I actually want the honest answer in the comments below. If you bought an estate like this today, who is the one person you'd never tell?